Hello and welcome. Today's repair is going to be on this 1977 Evinrude 115 horse, which is sitting on a 1977 Skeeter fishing boat. Looks like a pretty clean boat, especially given its age. I don't see any, there's no obvious rotting or transom warping or any of that kind of stuff. It's pretty nice. And the trailer is pretty well fitted to the boat. Both are pretty low to the ground, which has its benefits and downfalls, such as I don't know if I'm going to be able to get the motor all the way down without it hitting the ground. We'll see. It's got an older style power trim and tilt, which is kind of rare when it still works. They're out there. They usually don't work. Hooked up the battery, moved it down. It does work. So that's good. This hood off. See what it looks like. That's really on there. Okay, nothing's jumping out at me. We have a outboard temperature gauge. I don't know if I have one up on the dashboard though. I'll look into that. New replacement power pack from CDI. Looks like original coils. No cracking, paint chipping on the cylinder heads or blistering. Wiring doesn't look like it's falling apart except for this. Don't know what that's about. We are missing a starter, so we're gonna have to address that. Looks like we have an aftermarket fuel pump. Fuel lines feel pretty soft. Choke works. Looks like the linkage is correct. All in all, it's not too bad looking, really. Okay, I was able to track down a new used starter for this thing. Gonna put it on here, see if it works, and if it doesn't, take it from there. Had a slight problem with the hardware and not having any. So I've got that remedied as well. Okay, that is all attached. Let's see if it turns over okay. Not too shabby. Let's pop out the spark plugs, do a compression check. I would have liked it to see it turn over a little quicker than that, but ain't no gas in it. Cylinder's probably long dry, so when we do get fuel to it, I think it might turn over just a little quicker. We do, however, have 120 on both cylinders, so we're getting somewhere. Yeah, that sparks. Sparks. Nothing. Something. So, number one, nothing. Well, that's fun. Alright, I've removed the screws off of the cover. I'm going to take the cover off if I can. It feels like it's glued on here, to be honest. We're going to swap number 1 and number 3 coil wires and see if the number 1 coil still continues not to fire. It doesn't tell us very much, but it rules out if it's the coil or not. So the spark checker is hooked up to this coil, the top, and it sparks. Hook it up to the bottom, no spark. So we know it's not the coil, which it never is. So I will shocked myself, dang it. So now sensor 1 is triggering on this side of the power pack. So if 1 fires now, well, it'll tell us something. And 1 fires. Let's see if 3 fires. Nothing out of 3. So we are getting a signal wire out of the timer cylinder base to fire number 1. We are getting a signal wire out of the timer base to fire number 3. What's not firing is in the power pack. We need a power pack. So the owner of this boat actually had a bunch of spare parts, swapped out the power pack, and now we're firing on all cylinders, and we have even compression all the way around. So, good motor to work on. fuel system, he says this thing's been sitting forever, needs the fuel system checked out, cleaned, and the float gauge set properly, so we're going to be doing that. Missing a couple of things here, like a gasket on the airbox carburetor, and then the gasket for the air silencer. I doubt that's going to affect anything, but it is just notable. So we have some wetness on the carburetors here. Oil coming out. I don't know if that's necessarily a problem yet, but maybe. You can see the thing had fuel in it. So the float setting isn't even close to being correct. Yeah, alright, so we're going to put this into a tank, let it soak over a little while, get the old gas and oil out of it. We'll set the carb float height. Alright, bottom carburetor has the little link for the choke arm on it. This should be held on by a little tiny rubber O-ring. So again, if you're going to be doing this, ordering a spare one of those may not be a bad idea. Usually what I do is I order a couple of them because I'm going to lose them. Anyway, so you should just be able to take off the rubber O-ring. This one's hard as a rock. And I dropped it. Anyway, take that off, and the link comes off. And then the carburetor can be removed. So that one's a little better as far as the float setting. That's still not right. I mean, it needs to be better. We'll say that. So same thing, I'll just put it in the carb cleaner solution for a little while. These carburetors look quite clean. Really, I'm just getting the old gas and dust off of them. I don't think they need to be soaked. But I'll pop these out and check the float jets anyway. Easier to do it now. So this is interesting. As I'm blowing out the carburetor, I see the float spring, little retainer thing anyway, wedged into the bottom of the bowl. Pretty well in there too. There we go. Okay, put the carburetor down. Gonna use one of my float gauges, and we can see what the problem is. So we're gonna bend that arm as little as we can to get it back into those notches of that float gauge. You can, I think you're supposed to actually do it from the front, like so, but find the same results if I go through the side. So anyway, I'm just going to bend that and play with it until I get it straight. And that should just about do it. It is right between the two notches on both sides. This bottom corner is a little lower than it should be, but every time I try to adjust it, this pops down way too low. So a good middle ground is right where I got it, because that seems like that's as good as it's getting right there. So I'll put the bottom carb back together and go prep the motor for the reinstallation. Okay, here we are on the top carburetor, and you can see if I put the gauge here, you can tell how far off it is, kinda. I mean, the back's not bad, but the front, yeah, we're a 1/4 inch away. Well, that actually worked out pretty well. Yeah, I look a little low on the camera angle, but I mean, we're pretty darn close. See, it should be between the little notch, so we're just a pinch shy. A little low on the front. Let's see if I can fix it. All right. Top carburetor is done. Float is adjusted. I have a loop made to attach the carburetors. So I put the hose on. Put one of the zip ties on there. Now we just hook the throttle things back up. So the way the fuel lines were on here isn't quite ideal. It had a little elbow to straighten the fuel line from coming down, and it went into I think 2 T's, a series of T's. I don't know, it worked. It's just not quite how it should be. So I'm going to try to make it a little better. Okay, before I go any further, I'm going to remove the starter bolt right there. Well, that's new. I'm going to disconnect the battery. So I'm going to remove that bolt. Now, the reason for it is that hole for the starter mount goes all the way into the engine. There you go. See? Right into the intake manifold. So if there's any air leaking through there, it's going to have an intake leak. Was it a problem? I have no idea. So I'll clean it on the wire wheel real quick. Come over here to the gasket sealing compound jug. I will put some on the threads. And should we have an air leak, that should seal it up. Again, do you need to? I have no idea. It's just something I'm doing. Doesn't mention it in the manual anywhere. At least not that I've ever seen. But it doesn't mention a lot of things in the manual that are commonly known. Can I give you an example? Not right now. Okay, I'm going to slip a new O-ring on the little stud to hold the choke arm on. So I got this little tool from GSTP. I thought it was kind of neat. Figured I'd share it with you. It's a little spark plug gap checker. So you put it in there, and you have a little clamp thing that moves down and starts clamping down on the electrode. Turn the light on there. there for you. Anyway, I thought it was pretty cool because, you know, you don't have to sit there and tap the top, put it in too far, and then have to find something to pry it back out. So with this thing, you just set the spark plug in there, grab yourself a feeler gauge with, you know, whatever size you feel like doing. So you can use the feeler gauge, feel where it is. And right about there. Now there is some springs. So let's say you're trying to set it to, like, you know, 0.030. You know, you could set it to 0.025, and then that little thing will spring back a little bit and you should be right at 3020. But anyway, so it makes it so you don't have to sit in there and hit on the top or try to pry it. So like this is a 3.5, and that is pretty darn close to 3.5. I could go just a pinch more just for safe measure. Yeah, I'd say that did it. So yeah, I thought it was kind of neat. Just a nice little way to cap the spark plugs. You know, again, without hitting and prying on them. So I'll put a link below. If you're interested, check it out. All right, boat is outside. We're going to do a quick check of the fuel. That worked. Yeah, it burns. All right, good to know. Okay, water is flowing. Fuel system pumped up. All right, good and firm, no leaks. Let's see if it starts. So with no telltale, it's a little hard to tell if water's pumping, but I can feel water in the thermostat hoses there. Well, it does run. Idles pretty decently too. Well, didn't need much. Power pack, carburetor work, some fuel lines, and it should be good to go. I don't like how high it idles out of the water, but that doesn't mean much because when it's in the water, everything's going to change. So the next step here is put it in the water and see how it does. So one notable thing, this is a much newer controller. This is a 96 or 95, a newer controller with a custom, or maybe it's stock, I don't know, harness to power the older motor. This is a perfectly fine setup. The problem is this controller doesn't have an internal warning horn. It would use an external warning horn, which never made it into this setup. So we don't have a warning horn, and that's why we have the gauge. Now, whether that gauge works or not is anybody's guess. But for right now, that's the only way to know if that engine's overheating or not. It is spitting water out, so that's good. Who's calling me? So anyway, for the most part, engine runs fine. My only concern is the lack of a warning horn, but that's not really a big deal if that gauge does in fact work and the water pump works. So next step, put it in the water, see how it does, and I'll make another video if it comes back here. Otherwise, simple repairs, get this thing back on the water. See you next time. Well, I guess the boat's running okay.